How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to another video. I hope I'm not too late for the topic, but today we'll be talking about Elden Ring's DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree, and try to make as much sense as I can of what's going on here. Just as is usual with Fromsoft games, there will be things I'll be missing or that simply there's not much information to go around. If there's something I left out or something I'm missing here, please let me know in the comments down below. Also, I'm assuming that if you're watching this video, you already know what happens on the main game, so I'll not be getting into the main story. As a quick recap, there is a queen goddess named Marika that created something called the Elden Ring along the Erdtree. This ring contains a series of runes that are basically the pillars of reality. It was all going relatively well until her favorite son, Godwyn, was assassinated one night, and so Marika, full of grief, tried to break the Elden Ring, but her male counterpart stopped her from doing that. The whole kingdom descended into chaos, and now her remaining children are fighting for the inheritance of the land, along with the great runes that left the Elden Ring. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get right into the topic, because there is a lot to cover here. Once we defeated both Radahn and Mok, we head up to the Mokmin Palace. Near the cocoon where the body of Miquella rested, we'll find an NPC called Needle Knight Leda. She will tell us that she was guided by the call of her lord kind Miquella to the land of shadow. It will be enough with just touching the withered arm of the demigod to access this place, the land of shadow, a place obscured by the Erdtree, where the goddess Marika first set foot, a land perched in an unsung battle, set ablaze by Messmer's flame. That's exactly what the DLC page says, by the way. It was to this land that Miquella departed, divesting himself of his flesh, his strength, his lineage, of all things golden. And now, Miquella awaits the return of his promised lord. Long time ago, before the Shadowing, the Land of Shadows was burned to the ground in a great purge carried out by Messmer the Impaler, by orders of Queen Marika, with the goal of eradicating hornsent. At some point, however, Marika cut all her ties with Messmer, and the Land of Shadow was hidden beneath the Scadutree, to erase all evidence of the purge. Along the DLC, we'll find these fragments of the Scadutree that will help us to level up throughout the DLC, and just the DLC. One of the first things we see are a bunch of scorched ruins. This, of course, is Messmer's work. We'll find these so-called hornsent throughout the Shadowlands, and will be mentioned in various items. If we pay attention to some details, it becomes clear that they had something to do with the Omen and were opposed to the Golden Order. Some items belonging to the hornsent even reduce our proficiency with anything related to the Golden Order, and they are not so fond of us since we are tarnished and guided by the grace of gold, the same grace of gold that vanished most of their culture. And I know what you're thinking. Yes, the horns are very similar to the Omen. The Shadowlands exists a part of the lands between, and it's closer to the Crucible. The Crucible was a religion that preceded the Golden Order, and those blessed by the Crucible acquired small mutations, just as horns, small scales and tails, features of other animals. This refers to the concept of all life forms being more homogeneous during the formation of the Earth, and, of course, to the concept of the primordial soup. A soup inside a crucible. In essence, the hornsent are just people blessed by the crucible. The Omen are just what happens when the crucible hates you, or where someone gets too many blessings. They, of course, are outside of the Golden Order, and thus the Greater Will had them to be taken care of. That's where Messmer comes in. And in regards of what exactly the original sin is, we'll talk about that later, but it has something to do with the crucible, I think. Next thing we found here in the Shadowlands are some NPCs. There is Hornsent, of course, who hates Messmer to death, alongside the Knights of Leda, surrounding one of Miquella's crosses. These glowing lawn decorations that I really like how they look are like landmarks, places where Miquella got rid of a part of his being, that being metaphorically or literally, on his attempt of making himself a part of the Golden Order. Anyways, to continue this story, we go up to the castle of Belrat. Going through the castle, we'll find another hornsent, an old woman called Hornsent Grandam. As expected, she hates us, being a tarnished, guided by grace, and warns us that the divine beast will make us pay for what the impaler did to her people. That's the reason why, when we get to the top, we'll see her praying to the supposed beast to awaken from its slumber to take us down. This is the first proper boss fight of the DLC. Divine Beast, Dancing Lion. Once defeated, his remembrance reads: when the Impaler's army assailed the tower, the ritual of the lion dance was turned toward martial ends. its divinity, its fury, its life-footed beauty. When we take a closer look at this thing, we'll find out that these creatures are just two guys in a costume, one controlling the head and the other attaching the back clothes, just like a Chinese dragon. This thing is also covered on horns on the side, connecting this creature to the blessings of the crucible. That's why, during the fight, he will use most natural magics, excluding fire. This, alongside other creatures of the same nature, were almost erased by the impaler. The description of the tornado spells reveals us that. But there's something very interesting. The cutscene seen from other angles shows us that the servants were on a puddle of blood. Maybe what the Granddam really did here was to call the soul of the beast to imbue the two bodies of the keepers, since there are no more divine beasts left, or maybe they were already possessed before we arrive. Of course, the footage you're seeing here belongs to Bonfire VN, credits to him. Anyways, once we are ready we can go up to a staircase in the Divine Beast arena. It leads us to a locked door. Here we'll find a message from Leda. The gate of divinity lies in the tower sealed by shadow. That is surely where kind Miquella is headed. We are no Empyreans, but we must locate the path that will lead us there. As I said, these are spread out in the lands of shadow, and if her theory is correct, that will lead us to Miquella, and shed some light on how is he planning to achieve a state of godhood similar to his mother. So, back to the road we go. Following that path, we'll get to the Ansys castle. Here we'll find a couple of enemies similar to the Rellana Academy. On the cross in this location says that Leda found out that to get to Miquella we'll have to burn down the sealing tree hiding the tower on shadows. Also, to get out of this place we'll have to go through an interesting boss fight. Rellana, Twin Moon Knight. Once a Carian princess, Rellana disavowed her birthright and chose to stand at Messmer's side instead, knowing full well that not even the brilliance of the moon could grant him succor. Before long, she became known as the Sword of Messmer, wielding glintstone sorcery and Messmer's flame, one of Rennala's siblings. A part of me says that they only wanted to pay homage to Pontiff Sullivan, and I don't want to be that guy, but have you seen the shape of her armor? If those things have to be commissioned to fit the wearer's body, since she's taller than the average human, that means that Rellana has a big pair of fat and juicy magic milk. Exiting this place we get to another cross, and we see the path to the Shadow Keep. When we approach it, we'll receive a message saying that somewhere a great rune has been broken, and so too has a powerful charm. That will be important later, just keep that in mind. Entering the castle, it becomes clear that this place belonged to Messmer himself. There's even a giant hippo with golden spines guarding the place. Here, on the specimen storehouse, we'll find the Knights of Leda, alongside one of Mock's servants. He holds no grudge against us, by the way. The weird thing is that Leda and her companions says that they've been feeling weird lately, as if her faith towards Miquella has been diminished all of a sudden. And here is where the big revelations start to happen. According to Ansbach, the servant of Mock, the body of his lord had disappeared, and that it was taken to none other than Miquella. Not only that, if we follow the quest that Leda has for us here on the Shadow Keep, we discover that Miquella is planning to use Mock's body as a vessel to contain General Radahn's soul, so that he can be his king consort. If you recall, when we first find Radahn on the Red Mane's castle, he's too far gone since he was infected by the Scarlet Rot. His followers only wanted someone to finally kill him, to get him out of his agony. But apparently, the young Empyrean had other plans for him. Just as Marika needed Godfrey as her king consort, Radahn will play an important role on his apotheosis. Anyways, the boss fight of this dungeon is, of course, Messmer the Impaler. He's all over the promotional material for the DLC, and well, there he is. In all his angsty glory, a malevolent snake writhed within Messmer. And so, his very mother plucked out his eye, and put in its place a seal of grace. Yet, having done so, her fear compelled her to secret away her child within the realm of shadow, hidden away, keeping company with the original sin. During his second phase, Messmer will take out one of his eyes, releasing the full power of the base serpent. This is not necessarily the same god-devouring serpent fused with Rykard. We have to remember that his uprising against the Golden Order was totally on his own, so he probably chose to worship the enemies of the Erdtree, like the fire and snakes, as an act of rebellion and to remind Marika of what happened to Messmer.
The Abyssal Serpent is a natural enemy of the Erdtree, but the queen did what she could to contain the entity, replacing one of her son's eyes with a seal, but all her efforts were in vain. And be it for the greater will or just because Marika was a terrible person, she vanished her son to the Shadowlands, along with the original sin. We see that the Abyssal Serpent hasn't taken control over him, even stuck here in the Shadowlands. Marika's rune kept the thing contained, and not only that, Messmer used them as tools. That's why when we found him, he's very confused, not understanding why someone so bereft of light could be candidate for Elden Lord or be guided by grace. Something very curious also is a description of the winged serpent helmet that tells us that this other creature is an enemy of the base serpent that kept it at bay. This is also worked by Messmer's soldiers to help them control their flame. In other words, Messmer was never consumed by the serpent, he dominated it and kept his loyalty to his mother even after being vanished, continuing to do his one job. Those stripped of the grace of gold shall all meet death in the embrace of Messmer's flame. Once defeated, he will drop Messmer's kindling. This will be enough to access a castle and burn the sealing tree. But also, there is another detail that changes completely and closes the case on who is Melina's mother. Messmer, much like his younger sister, bore a vision of fire. Alright, of all of Marika's extended family, who fits the description the best? None other than Melina, confirming once and for all that she was part of the royal family all this time. There is a theory out there that says that Destined Death and the Gloam-eyed Queen is a serpent. I'm pretty sure you can start seeing the connection here, although I don't wanna go too deep into this. The other question is, who is Messmer's father exactly, but I do believe the most obvious answer is Radahn. But we'll talk about it in a moment, for this has some funny implications, so let's continue. With Messmer gone, we set our eyes to the ruins of Rao. Here we find the remainings of a church. Hidden behind this patch of vegetation, we go through a tunnel filled with scarlet rot. This is the first time in the Shadowlands that we see this thing. Behind all of this, we're met with a boss battle, Romina, Saint of the Bot. Oddly enough, aside of Malenia, this is the only scarlet rot thing that does not look like some crustacean or deformed abomination. I know, it's a giant chimera made of different insects, but it's beautiful in her own weird and lethal way. Once defeated, her remembrance reads: after the church was burned to the ground, Romina discovered a twisted divine element, which she weaved into the baleful scarlet rot. This divine element they're referring to is clearly the goddess of rot. It is safe to say that, thanks to Messmer, Romina ended up imbued by this god, and one of her spells reveals that very clearly. The scarlet butterflies are as the goddess of rot's wing. Bereft of a master, they were soothed by Romina, who reached out to them. Aside of Kaelit, the scarlet rot is only found in the underground of the lands between. Possible attempts of Romina of claiming vengeance upon the Golden Order, which she eventually did, for millennia was afflicted by this disease, stripping Marika of an Empyrean daughter capable of taking the throne. It is funny how much of the unfortunate things that end up happening to Marika, it's always karma coming back to bite her ass. Anyways, using Messmer's kindling, we can burn the sealing tree, revealing the path to the castle of Inner Elim. On our way up, we fight against the Knights of Miquella, that by this point is very clear that we're not planning on following their lord. That leads us directly to the final boss, but there are roughly 5 or 4 bosses extra that gives us important information about what's going on here, so before we continue. If we go to the depth of the Abyssal Forest, we found another dungeon, called Lord Midra's Manor. Here we'll find a couple of enemies that inflicts the state of madness, of the frenzied flame. We also find out that this place is filled with hornsent knights, but some of the highlights is this burnt skeleton that holds a magical weapon, and its description says: a torch made by attaching a dying flame of frenzy to a small spinal column. In a distant land, in an age long past, was born a man who failed to become the lord of frenzied flame. All that remains of him is cradled gently by Nanaya. Alright, this person, the skeleton, we can assume is Nanaya, We know this for a painting on the wall and a fraction of a second on the trailer. But where is the Lord of the Manor anyways? He was killed by the hornsent. We found an enemy in the middle of a room, impaled by what it seems like a giant needle. Once we killed them, the man begins to stand up and apologizes to Nanaya, saying that he endured too much. He rips the needle out of her body along with his head, awakening in the process the Lord of the Frenzied Flame. We found out that he was a major candidate for Lord of the Frenzied Flame, but he was not strong enough, and this time he was not punished by the Messmer but the hornsent, which ransacked its manor. We know that thanks to the description of the weapon impaling him. There is also the possibility that Midra's wife was actually a finger maiden of the three fingers. I like to think that this entity worked as a parasite, imitating the work of the two fingers, going after unsuspecting young women to turn them into an envoy of the three fingers. At some point, she and Midra fell in love, and she lured them to the Frenzied Flame, and we also know that his servants fell to this entity, as we know thanks to some enemies surrounding the area. Nanaya also got pregnant during the time, and eventually this got the attention of the hornsent, who raided the place and pierced him with that spear. But Nanaya made a plea that became a curse to one day, eventually, awake as the Lord of the Frenzied Flame. But how did she make that spell, you may ask? Remember what I said about the torch being made of a small spinal column? What I'm trying to get across here is that Nanaya aborted or, well, killed her own baby to make a torch of Frenzied Flame. Then she used it to make a curse that kept her husband alive while in constant pain, all because she was hypnotized by another god. I love how this game has this level of dark tones and violence, but when I say that I like incest, then I am the total weird. If you go towards the north of the map, on one of the ruins of the Hand, we found the Cathedral of Manus Meteor. There we'll find an NPC, the County Mirror. He will send us in a quest across the ruins, but he also reveals us something very important. The true reason why Miquella renounced to the Golden Order and took this path. In essence, he says that the young Empyrean knew that his mother was unhinged, that all his lineage was corrupted, that his plan all along laid here, in the Shadowlands. He wanted to take the role of his mother, by other means, even if, while doing so, he was too similar to the Queen. You may also add that one thing they had in common was their preference for men, goddammit. He continues saying that, in his point of view, the two fingers that originally guided Marika were also defective, and that what they needed was a real mother. When we come back to this site after completing a quest, we unlock a boss fight against Meteor, the mother of fingers. The mother of all two fingers and finger creepers was in turn a magnificently gleaming daughter of the Greater Wheel, and the first shooting star to fall upon the lands between. But doesn't this thing belong to the Golden Order? Why is it doing here on the Shadowlands? Somehow, this creature with a microcosm that communicated it with the Greater Wheel was defective. That's why she was trapped here, abandoned in the Shadowlands. That being thanks to Marika or the Greater Wheel. Upon returning to the cathedral, Ymir and one of his servants turns against us, proclaiming himself as Mother of the Fingers. He was a close friend of the royal family of Caria. He taught Rellana her sorcery, although he left his position along her to serve Messmer, abandoning the teachings of the stars in exchange of the two fingers. We know this from his pieces of armor, although, as we already saw, little by little he became aware of the hypocrisy and corruption of Marika's family. But he seemed to have no problem serving the fingers. After all, the sorcerers of Caria serve the stars, and the fingers are nothing but just another cosmic entity. Now, with that out of the way, I know you're probably wondering what even is the Scadutree all about. Sadly, just as his counterpart, his nature is very elusive. There is no much to say about it, only that it's the shadow of the Earth Tree. The motive behind its appearance is a mystery too, and if any of you have an idea of what the Scadutree is about, leave it in the comments down below. But all this talk about the Earth Tree led us to the next boss, in a place on the north of the map called the base of the Scadutree. Here lies the Scadutree Avatar. The Scadutree is the shadow of the Earth Tree, born of dark notions that bear no sense of order, that twist and bends its stalk, rendering it brittle. This thing drops Miquella's rune, the same we know he renounced when we enter the Shadow Keep. A great rune relinquished by Miquella, broken and bereft of its bounty. It retains not but the power to resist charms. Miquella set off for the tower enshrouded by shadow, abandoning everything, his golden flesh, his blinding strength, even his fate, all in an effort to bury the original sin, to embrace the whole of it, and be reborn as a new god. This is most definitely the rune inherited by the Empyrean while the Shattering break out. He probably abandoned it at the base of the tree, where it mutated and transformed it into this. Since some flowers are always looking towards the sun, maybe this flower was looking for the grace, for the divinity of a demigod and didn't want to let go of it. Also, this thing is a withered sunflower and Count Ymir robes had a petal decoration. I'm pretty sure there's a connection here, but I can't think of anything. Now we turn our eyes towards the south, to the Cerulean coast. Here we can enter into the Stone Coffin Fissure. On this area we'll find a cross that reads, "I abandon here my love." And this will be important later, okay? This place is only accessible once we visit the Shadow Keep and get a message saying that a great rune has been broken. Miquella's power needs to be weakened for us to get here. Keep that in mind. Going through this place, we find an item referring to Saint Trina. Maybe that name reminds you of something. After falling for a cliff, we end up in another boss fight, the Putrescent Knight. All tainted flesh eventually becomes putrescence, and this clump of it imbibed Saint Trina's nectar, which granted it eternal rest. And so, it was that putrescence became her knight. Saint Trina is a character that was mentioned before on the Holy Tree questlines. She's related to Miquella and has some connection with dreams, but we're told here that her nectar granted eternal rest to the Putrescent Knight. And since Marika deactivated death from the Elden Ring, that means that Saint Trina somehow managed to escape this by, depending on how you see it, putting someone to sleep indefinitely. So, in other words, is some kind of poison that can affect undead things. Anyways, after going to the dungeon, we're finally met with Saint Trina, who is strangely fused to a flower. Now, before we continue, there is something important we have to do first, and that is talking to Theolia. He's an NPC that will be found at the beginning of the DLC. He sells us perfumes and poison-related items. After visiting the Shadow Keep and receiving the message that a great rune has been broken, if we speak with him again, he'll say that he no longer feels the charm of Miquella, and that he's slowly remembering worshipping Saint Trina. He fears that Miquella will not be able to forgive him, for she was the discarded half. But he can't help himself and builds up the courage to go down to the Cerulean coast, where we'll be found praying to Saint Trina. And here's the revelation that Saint Trina is to Miquella what Radahn is to Marika. This is probably part of Miquella's nature as an Empyrean, but unlike Marika, who probably fucked his other half more than once, we'll get to that later, Miquella had to seal Saint Trina here, on a forgotten rift on the Shadowlands, in order to achieve his own godhood. If we drink from her nectar, two things will happen, depending on how you see it. Either we die or go to sleep for a very long time. I'll save you the details of this questline, but in essence, Saint Trina wants us to stop Miquella from completing his plan.
Make Miquella stop. Don't turn the poor thing into a god. Godhood would be Miquella's prison, a cage. Divinity is beyond saving. You must kill Miquella. Grant him forgiveness.
And if you think about it, she's not that wrong. Also, just as Marika's male part was Radahn, Saint Trina is Miquella's female part. That's why I told you to keep the message from the cross in mind. I abandon here my love. Miquella's love, all his compassion and kindness was represented on Saint Trina. He had to dispatch her to truly ascend like his mother, for his love would not allow him to continue. We have to convince Theolia to help us to kill Miquella, and if we manage to do it, he will appear on the two last boss fights, along with Ansbach against the Knights of Leda. Anyways, with all of that out of the way, we finally face the last boss, Miquella's plan about to come to fruition. By the way, this place is the Gate of Divinity. It is seen on the DLC trailer. Here is where Marika achieved godhood, and what I'm about to say is mostly a speculation, I think, but if I'm not wrong, this whole castle is channeling the power of the crucible. That's why you see a lot of bodies of hornsent stuck on the Gates of Divinity. This is how Marika, I believed, created the Earth Tree, and by proxy, the Elden Ring. If I'm missing something or I'm wrong, please correct me in the comments, okay? From the gates being used by Miquella emerges the body of the Lord of Blood. Imbued with the soul of General Radahn, we hear Miquella's voice. He had completed his purpose, to be his king consort. On his second phase, the Empyrean comes out of the gate to buff him up, claiming that if we're truly aware of the sin plaguing the world, we'll make way for him in his new order. Obviously, we are the protagonists and we managed to beat them up, but there's been some speculation of what exactly is going on here, you know? Once defeated, we unlock a memory of Miquella before, or well, during the events of the Shattering, claiming that he is going to be a god, and if he were to achieve his purpose, he wanted his lord brother to be his consort, referring to Radahn, of course. I love how the Elden Beast has no issue with incest on the royal family, but hey, Messmer can't have a sealed god on his body because that's too much, right? God fucking damn it. We now know that Miquella was manipulating Mokol this time to be kidnapped from the Holy Tree, and if Count Ymir and Saint Trina knew this very well, being close to the royal family, it is very clear that all of this happening, including Malenia fighting against Radahn, was all part of Miquella's plan. Yeah, maybe he was trying to use the Holy Tree to age up his body, but that was an extra. His real plan, the whole scheme laid here in the Shadowlands. And taking into consideration the mental state of the afflicted by the omen, Mog was a perfect candidate for this thing. Now, the whole thing with Radahn is even murkier. You see, when Radahn was alive, what he was doing was keeping the stars arrested with his gravitational powers, because that kept other outer gods at bay and also interfered with Ranni's fate. But not only Ranni's fate was affected by this, but the whole Carian royal family. That included Rellana, of course, Ranni, and also Radahn. So what if the intention of Malenia's army was not to get into Nokron, but also to force Radahn to complete his fate? In other words, he denied Miquella. That being consciously or not, but seeing the type of character there is Radahn, I do not believe he would accept Miquella's offer this way. And since the charm of Miquella had no effect on him thanks to the stars being arrested and his fate being denied, the young Empyrean sent his sister to take care of him. Also, it's not clear if Malenia is under Miquella's spell, and personally, I do not want to believe that. Those two have a neat sibling relationship. After all, Malenia was the blade of Miquella, and she followed his plan until the end, for we now know what did she whisper to Radahn on the trailer, thanks to the description of Radahn's armor. When Malenia, blade of Miquella, let the rot flower blossom in Ionia, Radahn heard a murmur in his ear. Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort. So Malenia was in on the plan all along. She knew what would happen, that he will take Mog's body and one day use Radahn's soul, now that he was afflicted by the Scarlet Rot, all in order to ascend to Elden Lord. That's why she was so confident on Miquella one day returning to the Holy Tree. I'm not saying that Miquella is the bad guy, but that little femboy is a total manipulator and a schemer. Anyways, what Saint Trina said ended up being true, that all of Marika's lineage was imperfect, and in fact, we now know a bit more about her backstory now. We already established that the Shadowlands was the Queen's birthplace, and that at some point it was ripped from reality and put into a limbo. There is a hidden zone in the right corner of the map, called the Hinterlands. Here lies a small shaman village. We also find two more items, an incantation that belongs to her. Marika bathed the village of her home in gold, knowing full well that there was no one to heal. We also find other things that belong to her. A braid of golden hair, cut loose, Queen Marika's offering to the Grandmother. Boost holy damage negation by the utmost. What was her prayer, her wish, her confession? There is no one left to answer, and Marika never returned home again. The Queen was mourning something awful that happened here. Also, this was her birthplace. The Goddess Queen came from a small, humble village. We can assume that this place was intact before what Messmer did. This place is also very hidden and a part of the rest of the Shadowlands. Messmer knew this place. He knew what this meant to his mother, and so he kept it a secret. If that's the case, what led Queen Marika to do all of this? What forced her to try to achieve godhood? Well, the answer to that can be found here in the Shadowlands too. And yes, I'm about to justify the genocide, but sometimes you just have to get rid of some pests, so hear me out.
Remember when we were talking about the hornsent, that they were the dominant culture here in the realm of shadow? Let's just say that they were not so kind to other cultures, and I'm not talking about what they did to Midra, that was very justified. The hornsent had the blessing of the crucible, but they only saw their blessing, that being the horns, they only deemed as valid. And I wanted to highlight this because there is a place where we found some manfly enemies. They are described as having an illness, of course, but what if the manfly were just another manifestation of the crucible blessings, that when it gets out of control, it manifests itself as an illness? But what does any of this have anything to do with Marika? There are proof that led us to believe that the people of Marika's village were used as experiments to make the first jars, the same we find in the lands between. In the Bonnie village we will find these experiments, and a couple of items with disturbing descriptions that point out to this being the case. A couple of butcher knives, and this weapon in specific. Whip bestrewn with rotten, misshapen teeth, filthy and seething with disease, and those the victim with deadly poison upon each strike. The flesh of shamans was said to meld harmoniously with others. We also see here, in the depth of the Bonnie jail, what a jar without its protection looks like, and they are very similar to the shamans and to Marika by that extent. So, when Marika first made contact with the Mother of Fingers and the Greater Will, somehow she gained the knowledge to ascend to divinity, to use the castle of Inner Elim to channel the powers of the crucible, to form the gates of divinity, to use all those hornsent, some strands of her hair, and maybe something else. Something related to what she takes at the beginning of the trailer. There are some theories saying that this thing is actually the head of a snake, and that the glowm-eyed queen is actually a snake, but regardless, here, she created the Elden Ring. This gave her a set of powers. We do not know exactly what kind of powers, but one of those was the ability to divide herself into her male counterpart, that being Radahn. This is also a reference to an alchemical concept called the Rivis, which is the perfect human being the product of the alchemical magnum opus, the magnum opus being the Philosopher's Stone. It is represented having attributes of both male and female. It also represents counterparts and duality. This also circles back to the crucible being an alchemical construct, but let's go back to the topic, okay? After establishing the Golden Order and having two children with Radahn, one accursed by a snake and the other a reincarnation of the queen that potentially is a snake, but we will not get into that here, Marika decides to take revenge upon the hornsent for two reasons. The first one being that the Greater Will needed to get rid of other religions, and the second being to make them pay for what they did to her family, and so she used Messmer's flame for that purpose. With her new powers, or by any other mean, she ripped a portion of the lands between that contain most of the culture of the hornsent. This part is mostly a theory, but we see a place here in the Shadowlands called the Suppressing Pillar with an inscription saying that this is the very center of the lands between. That means that this place once belonged to the lands between, and someone, Marika most probably, ripped it out of reality, veiling it on shadows. But to understand how deep and profound was Marika's hate, we have to take a closer look to the fire golems. This thing is filled with all kinds of corpses. On their models is not visibly, but they were definitely hornsent. Their souls are used as fuel, punishment, and a threat to these people. This thing is also filled with horns and spirals that were sacred to the worshippers of the crucible, and one of their spells takes the shape of a fiery spiral. That is also a manifestation of the crucible, and the cherry on top is the mask in the center of these things that reminds to the spiraled eye of the fire giant that was also part of the hornsent religion. In other words, these golems are filled with religious paraphernalia, turned into blasphemy and made into a war machine to take revenge on the culture that massacred Marika's people. The means to create the jars we see in the Land 13 was created by one of the hornsent that was not very fond of what they were doing to Marika's people, but regardless, they all collectively paid for the sins of their people. Maybe this was the original sin they were trying to hide. Maybe the original sin was whatever Marika was doing with that snake. Maybe the original sin was having two self-cested child, who knows? The sad part is that despite all of this, her two first kids were cursed one way or another by a snake. And then Margit and Mok were cursed by the crucible, and her other Imperial daughter was infected by an entity indirectly awakened by Messmer's purge. Another funny bit is that hornsent Grandam calling the lion's soul into the sculpted keepers' bodies, who are most definitely blessed by the crucible, reflects what Miquella was trying to do if you think about it, using the body of Mok, who was also cursed by the crucible, to be possessed by the soul of Radahn, who was known as the lion. A lion that had divine powers, such as arresting the star's movements. Poor Marika couldn't catch a break, huh? But anyways, that's all I have to say for today. I hope you liked the video, and if that's the case, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. That really helps out the channel. Let's see if this time YouTube lets me monetize, because the last time they thought I was plagiarizing content. Plagiarizing my own content, so yeah. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.